Hi all, this is Dr. S.J. Kala, an Associate Professor at the Research Center of English, Farma College, Madurai, Tamil Nadu. Now we are going to look at Robert Frost's Mending Wall. We all know about Robert Frost and we have learned quite a bit of his poems. Now today this poem is something special. Let's see what it talks about, because it looks like the narrator doesn't want walls or boundaries, but then let's see what really happens. So here the poem begins this way. Something there is that doesn't love a wall, that sends the frozen ground swell under it and spills the upper boulders in the sun and makes gaps even two can pass abreast. So he's saying, he begins this way, giving us a mysterious feel that there is something in the air or there is something hovering around that sees to it, or that sees to it that there are no walls, or that looks into the point that there isn't any wall. And then he's saying that whatever it is, it sees to it that the ground is frozen. So every winter time the ground is frozen. So when it's frozen, the ground starts swelling under, and because of this, what happens? The structure, there is a kind of a breach in the structure of the wall, and so there are boulders kept on the wall. So these boulders are spilling in the sun. So when there is a change of weather, when there is a change of climate, when there is summer, you find that the boulders are rolling up. And he's saying the gap is not just a small gap for us to ignore. So he's very clear about it. It's not just a small gap, but it's a huge gap, a large gap through which how many people can pass? Not one, but just two can pass abreast. Okay? Then he wonders, who must have caused this kind of a breach in the wall, or who must have wrought this kind of a gap in the wall. And then he's saying, he wonders if it must be the work of the hunters. So he's saying the work of hunters is another thing. Have come after them and made repair when they have left not one stone on a stone, but they would have the rabbit out of hiding to please the yelping dogs. So he's saying, I know, probably this is the work of the hunters, or rather he presumes this to be the work of the hunters. Which to be the work of the hunters? The gap between the wall, okay, the wall that divides his property from the property of his neighbor. Okay, so he's saying probably this is the work of the hunters, because I remember earlier once when they did this, I came here to repair it. And what did I find? They would turn out all this stone one after the other. Why? Because they are curious, or they are interested in finding out the rabbit that's hiding, because only then the yelping dogs can be pleased. The screaming dogs can be pleased, he's saying. Then he goes on to say, the gaps I mean, no one has seen them made or heard them made, but at spring mending time we find them there. So he's saying, he's very clear. He doesn't know the source of the gap, or he doesn't know who wrought in this gap. But then he's very clear. I have not heard about it, about who made the gaps, or I have not seen anyone consciously indulging in creating that gap in the wall. But then what happens? Whenever I come, or we come, that is me and my neighbor, whenever we come, the narrator says, whenever we come, when is that time? The spring. And it's not just spring time, it's spring mending time. So we understand that this is a habitual action. So he's saying, whenever we come here during this spring to mend this wall, or to look at the wall, what do we find? When we walk along the wall, we find that there is a gap. And therefore he's saying, so long, all of a sudden there's a gap. So we wonder who made this gap, or how the gap came in there. So now he goes on to say, So the very point that they come at spring mending time is understood to be nothing new, but it's a practice that's been going down for ages. So it talks about the task of mending, or the venture undertaken by both the narrator and his neighbor in mending the wall is an ancient venture. So now it sounds like it's more ritualistic. That's what he says. When we come here during the spring mending time, I find the gap there, and when I think over and when I mull over to find out how this gap there, I'm not able to find it at all. So what do? I let my neighbor know beyond the hill, and on a day we meet to walk the line and set the wall between us once again. So he's saying, so what do? I have my neighbor who is there beyond the hill, that side of the hill. So I call him and I say, okay, come, let's walk along the wall and see how much repair the wall needs. So we keep walking along the wall that is between us. So there's a kind of a boundary between us. Okay, and so we decide to go. And what's the next task that we do? To each the boulders that have fallen to each, and some are loaves and some so nearly balls, we have to use a spell to make them balance. Hey, stay where you are until our backs are turned. So look here, he's saying, as he pointed out earlier, we do not know what happened, how it happened, but there's a gap. Now, what sort of a gap? It's not just an ordinary gap, but a huge gap, which can allow two people to walk abreast, okay, not squeeze through, but walk abreast. So when they can walk abreast, he's saying, so we go there, walk along the wall, we decide to walk along the wall, and we find that some boulders are missing. So we say, okay, come on, we will keep the boulders. So they pick up huge boulders and place them on the wall. But then he's saying, all the time when we do that, we are kind of praying and we are kind of chanting a spell there, a magical spell there, saying, wait, don't fall off, because whenever we try to keep the boulder there, it seems to be rolling off. You understand? I repeat, whenever they try to keep or fix the gap and keep the boulder there, it seems to be rolling down. And so he feels that they have to say a kind of a magical spell and see to it that it doesn't fall before their back is turned, before they turn their backs. Okay, so now this reminds us of the mythological character Sisyphus. This Sisyphus was punished by the gods to roll a boulder, huge boulder, up a hill, and he would undertake this task. Roll the boulder, go up the hill. And when he is almost convinced that he has reached up the hill, the gods would not allow him to fulfill his punishment. So the boulder would roll down. And again, the next morning, he'll have to do the same and keep repeating it ever after. So it's a perpetual task. So now, the task that the narrator and the neighbor undertake is sort of a Sisyphean task. Okay, so they keep the boulder, but they feel that there's something that makes the boulder roll back again. So they're trying to even chant a spell there. So he's saying, we wear our fingers rough with handling them. So lifting up stones or boulders is not so easy, huge stones. So it wears, it just affects his fingers, and they turn rough. Oh, just another kind of outdoor game. So in this task, he considers it to be a kind of a game. Okay, Two Tramps in the Mud Time. You must have read that, where he talks about vocation and avocation. So similarly here he says, it's just another kind of outdoor game, though it's a task, a difficult task, a Sisyphean task, but still he involves pleasure in it, or game, and he makes it a game. He says it's a kind of another outdoor game. One on a side, it comes to little more. There where it is, we do not need the wall. Then he's saying, okay, at one point of time, I start pondering over this very fact of, should we have a wall? So it's a narrator who first questions, should we have a wall? And he's saying, yeah, why should we? Isn't it ridiculous to have a wall? See, you have only pine trees and I have apple orchards. How is it going to be a kind of a confusion here? And he's saying, my apple trees will not cross over my boundary and reach yours to eat your to eat the cones on your pine trees. Then he's saying, I tell him. He only says, what does the neighbor say? He only says, good fences make good neighbors. So that's a belief. That's a kind of a belief that we are customized to believe in. So he's saying good fences make good neighbors, and so we should have a wall. Now, what should we have a wall is a question that pops up in the mind of the narrator. And when he asks, the neighbor says, good fences make good neighbors. Okay, then spring is the mischief in me, and I wonder if I could put a notion in his head. So he's saying, I try to put some sense into his head, and I know I come here during the spring mending time, and it's spring. I'm supposed to blame the spring for all that's happening now. So so who's the prankster here? It's spring who is doing all mischief here. So he's saying, I just try to put some notion into his head, and I ask him, okay, so I ask him, why do they make good neighbors? I ask him, isn't it where there are cows? Okay, so only if we have cows around, we can say that good fences will make good neighbors. But we don't have cows. There are no cows. But still should there be a fence? Still should there be a fence? So he's saying, before I built a wall, I'd asked to know what I was walling in or walling out. So he's saying, I want to know whether I was walling in before I built a wall or walling out. So I don't have a cow. I don't have cows here. But then, what do? I built a wall still. He asks these questions. Should I have? Something there is that doesn't love a wall, because he feels that every time they try to place a boulder there, there is something that doesn't love the wall. And he's saying there's something that wants it down. So he's saying maybe it could say elves to him. Okay, so there might be some spirits. And so I want them to be brought down. Okay, so now, but it's not elves exactly, and I would rather, he said, it for himself, I see him there. So he's saying it's not the spirits. They are not the spirits or the elves, but there is something else. It's not elves exactly, and I would rather, he said it for himself, I see him there, bringing a stone grasped firmly by the top in each hand, like an old stone savage armed. So he's saying, yeah, I know there are no cows. So because there are no cows, I don't need a fence. But then when I don't need a fence, I see him. What do I see him doing? I see him coming towards me. What is he still doing? There are no elves, he says. Hey, here, don't have such notions that there are some spirits or elves that are stopping our work, that are stopping us from doing this job. No, but then he brings a stone grasped firmly in his hand, and the narrator describes a neighbor with the stone in hand as an old stone savage armed. So he calls him a savage. Why does he call him a savage? Probably it's a ritualistic task, and so he says it's an age-old ritual, an ancient ritual, a stone age ritual, and therefore when the neighbor does that or indulges in that task of building the wall or mending the wall, he calls him a savage. Now listen, throughout he's been asking, should we have a wall? Should I still have a fence when I don't have cows? Then he says, he moves in darkness as it seems to me, not of woods only and the shade of trees. He will not go behind his father's saying, and he likes having thought of it so well. So he's saying, I can see after doing the task, he moves in the dark and he goes into the shades of trees. And I know it all depends on what his father had been teaching him. So it is all passed on. This task of mending the wall every springtime is a legacy that's been passed on to him by his father. So he's saying, and he likes having thought of it so well. What does he say again? He says again, good fences make good neighbors. But let's also focus on this point. The narrator says that, or he asks this question, should there be a wall? But isn't it ridiculous if he doesn't want a wall, or if he doesn't want to mend the wall? Why is it there exactly? So isn't it quite ironical? Now he feels that there's no reason for the wall to be kept, but still he believes in the walls for the sake of the walls. And these two men meet along the walls on the terms of two things. One, civility, okay, that makes them so civilized and so on. Civility. And another one on the terms of neighborliness, because only then they can be good neighbors. So they meet, these two young men, or these two men, we do not know whether they're young or old. These two men meet on two terms of civility and neighborliness, so that they can build a barrier between their property. And this is not a new task, a new venture, but it's a task that has been held out, executed very traditionally every year. And as I told you earlier, it's a Sisyphean task. Okay, so though this narrator seems to be questioning about the need for mending the wall, the need for the wall itself, the neighbor still persists to have the wall. So this particular poem has three themes. The first one is building a barrier or building a border. And the second one is the doomed nature of the task undertaken. Every time they try to do the task, it's not completed. There's something around that just spoils the very task. So the doomed nature of the task. First theme being the building of the barrier. Second one being the doomed nature of the task. And the third one is persistence in this activity, which you find in the neighbor. The neighbor is too persistent. The narrator doesn't want it to happen, but the neighbor is too persistent, and he wants the activity to be carried on. Okay, and we looked at this poem ends in a complex way, as it always does. And Frost has this habit of ending his poems in a very complex way. So it ends in a very complex way, and he seems to be talking about, or seems to be giving us a picture of a sketch of two different types of people. One is a wall builder and the other is a wall breaker. So he gives us the sketches of two types of people, a wall builder and a wall breaker. There is one who insists upon building the superfluous walls, and there is another one who wants to dispense with this practice of building the wall. So we do not know what is right, though it's a ritualistic art, though it's an ancient ritual, still they want to build the wall. So the building of the wall is both literal and figurative. Literal in the sense of mending the wall or the boundary between the neighbor's property and the other. On the other hand, figurative, it denotes the rules and the laws that we normally lay in our own society. Okay, so the literal and the figurative walls that we build. So now this ritual of maintaining the wall every springtime is dual and complementary in nature of human society. You find that when I say dual, it talks about the rights of the individual to respect the right of the others. I repeat, when I say dual in nature, I say it is it talks about, or it highlights the right of an individual to appreciate and respect others' rights. Plus, it is also an excuse to interact with the neighbor. So when otherwise I think, because he's saying the neighbor beyond the hill, otherwise I'm sure they won't take time to go talk with the neighbor. So here is a very meaningful excuse to interact with the neighbor, and therefore it becomes an act of social interaction. So it's a kind of a social gesture. Okay, and beyond all these things, there are certain critics who always says that Frost poems can talk about the creative process. So here this particular poem that talks about building the walls and breaking the walls talks about the creative or the creative and the constructive and the disruptive nature of the creative process. I repeat, it talks about the constructive and the disruptive nature of the creative process. Okay, so it highlights upon this constructive, like the neighbor who wants to build the wall, and the narrator who also complements in building it. Creative process is also undertaken. So somebody wants to unleash their creativity and engage in a creative process, but at the same time, like something mysterious that's happening, like it's like the mending wall is a Sisyphean task, I told you, because the boulders keep coming down even before they can turn their backs. So it's kind of disruptive. So you find the creative process is at times disruptive also. So I think you understood this poem pretty well, and I hope you enjoyed it. So thank you for your patient listening, and thank you for watching this.